Hi there, Miss Lambs here. Now we move on to Criteria C, the critical thinking. So let's get started. This is just a screenshot of the scoring band for Criteria C, critical thinking. I have some very interesting feedback from students. They were asking, oh, Miss Lam, why are you highlighting the lower band as well as the higher band? Why don't you just highlight the higher band? The reason why I highlight some points from the lower band is because I want you to see how the layer is developed. So how each criteria, each strand is developed. So for example, here you can see that also you need to have some analysis in order to gain some points in the critical thinking. And then what kind of analysis are we looking at? We're looking at analysis that is relevant to the research question. Okay, and how do we know that is relevant to the research question? Is that something that should be supported by the evidence? Okay. So that means what I'm trying to say is that the reason why I do some highlighting at various places that I want you to know how is each strand is developed throughout the criteria. So that's why I highlight parts of it. And you will notice for this one, it's a bit special. There are three colors because actually for criteria C, the three strands are judged differently. Okay, so there's some part that is important. So for example, in criteria C, as you can see later on, okay, from external feedback as well, is that the discussion and evaluation is the most heavily weighted strand in the critical thinking in each score band. So that's why for related to the discussion and evaluation, I highlight in red, okay, and then the analysis is highlight in blue, okay. So and then the research is highlight in green, okay. So you can just pause this video and take a good look at each part, each strand, and then as we go along, you will notice how do they weight differently and things like that. Okay, and then this part is the unpack criteria C. So first of all, this criteria is called critical thinking. So you need to analyze and evaluate the external research that you use. Okay, so how do we analyze and evaluate? Is for example how they can be used in the development of the arguments. How do you use it? Okay, so that's why it's important that you understand the reference that you're referring to, and then get the key idea from those external study, and then develop your arguments throughout your essay. Okay, analyze of the research, okay, and focus on the research questions. Oh yes, this is very important. So when you have the analysis of your research, okay, you need to see how well it applied to your research question. Okay, so that's how the effectiveness comes in. And also you to for critical thinking, so we have been talking about like the importance of research in section A and section B already. Okay, so and then section C, what we're developing is we try to question ourselves, assess whether this external references are reliable, are accurate. Okay, and to do that, you need to understand what those experiment is about, those external experiment is about, and from then you can look at critically whether the experiment is reliable. So in the past, we've mentioned briefly already. For example, how can we judge if an external study is reliable? First of all, it's the publication source. Okay, so comparing a study conducted by university and something that is from Cosmo Health, okay, from a magazine. Of course, we prefer the university studies. And then second thing that is related to is the method. Okay, so in the past we've mentioned about some examples such as the effect of caffeine on human body. So some students they have used those reference, but turns out one of the students they look at the sample size, then the sample size might not be big enough. So they also look at the method, okay, and challenge the fact that, oh, is this method reliable? Is the sample size big enough? Things like that. Another thing you can also look into is the publication date. So preferably you should be looking at research that's after 2000, okay, the year 2000. Anything that's older than that is fine, it's still acceptable, but we prefer to have some updated references, okay. But at the same time, don't use the latest one as well. Why don't try to avoid use a lot of latest one? Is because the latest one may not have enough peer review. Okay, peer review. So in the scientific community, what happens is that when someone publish a study, okay, a paper, then the scientific community they will do some peer review. Okay, so to see whether the experiment is replicable in other experiment setup. Okay, so So then that means that to make sure that the data is not fabricated. So so we're looking at, for example, maybe the year 2000 to 2010, that may be a good start. Okay, this range, because something that's too recent then may not have peer review, or some research that's too old then maybe it's outdated. So you also need to look at the time of publish. Okay, so there's a lot of things you can look into. And also, for example, we also mentioned you can also look at the source of fund if you can find out whether there's any bias or hidden agenda behind it. So that was quite interesting fact about it. And then next part, we come to Ms. Rawat's, my colleague Ms. Rawat's annotation on section C. So if you have seen the previous video, you should have downloaded the full PDF already. So let's just briefly run through them. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, so they will talk about critical thinking. So how the ability to apply the select sources and methods effectively. Okay, so things like use of data. So use of data is your experiment. Okay, so for example, your experiment, whether you have enough sample size. Okay, and then if you use any statistic tests, okay, you need to justify why you're using those. And then of course, you need to standardize this. This is also related to the next criteria presentations, criteria D. Again, table and graph should be standardized. If you want to know more, you can refer to the IA one. Actually, it's quite thorough in detail. Yeah, okay. And then discontinuous IV, we expect 10 repeats or more because you need to use them to do the t-test. Yeah, again, remind you is that you need to explain why you use certain statistic tests. For example, you need to explain why you're using a two-tailed t-test and how it's applied. How is it applied? For t-test, you don't. Oh, just one thing for t-test, don't show the formulas. All you need to do is just type at the end of the table and say that t-test p-value is calculated by Excel. Is fine. Why I will mention that, if you have seen the t-test video, you'll notice that actually t-test has two types. One is the done by manually, okay, which forms t-value, and another one is a t-test that's done electronically through Excel, and what you get is p-value, and how you interpret it is very different. So again, how it was applied, if you're using the two-tailed t-test and you're calculating the p-value using Excel, just quote p-value is calculated by Excel is fine. Okay, that's all you need to do. Okay, so and then how you apply it, okay, how you apply is you need to use the table to report your t-test. Okay, use the table to report t-test, and then later in your conclusion of the data, then you refer, oh, is there significant difference, things like that. Okay, so what does the result mean? So this is the conclusion of the t-test. Okay, so if you use graph, okay, must be correctly labeled, okay, and show the key elements. So that means the axis label, the plots must be clear. Okay, so so on first glance, when the reader look at your graph, they will understand what this graph is about. Okay, yes, and then so that was more onto the experimental side. Okay, now we move on to the argument side. So you need to use, okay, analyze and present data so that it will support and clarify the arguments that lead to the conclusion of the experiment. Again, it must be logical. Sometimes because students do many additions or editing, okay, so they might have some contradiction statements. So always double check, have a final read before you submit it, okay, whether your statement or any of your statement is contradict, okay, each other. So watch out for that one. And a clear and logical argument can be achieved by making repeat reference to the research question. Now, this is very important because what you are doing, all this research, all this experiment is trying to answer your research question. So you need to always refer to your research question. And it's very important because as you can see throughout section A, B, and C, okay, they always say how well your resources, how well your experiment is applied to the research question, right? So make sure you always refer back to the research question. This is very, very important. Okay, and conclusion, research. Again, they also mention about the research. Okay, but if you have any biological research that reveal unexpected outcome, this should be pointed out. Now, this is important because in the previous video, previous label, you can see that if you see anything that is out of expectations, okay, so for example, you say that, you see caffeine will speed up heart rate, let's say, but then some study you find out under certain circumstances, caffeine actually lowers the heart rate. Okay, so this out of what you expect, then you need to look in more in depth as to why this happened and things like that. So that is related to your critical thinking. So don't feel that, oh, I need to avoid this reference because it's against what you're proposing. No, actually, it's okay if you have enough word count, you can put those in and then criticize it, or maybe explaining why it's not what you expect. In fact, a good EE should have a balanced argument if possible. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, origin may not fully, okay, in this case. Okay, so if your, for example, if your research and your experiment cannot fully answer your research questions, then you can point out what was wrong. Okay, what are the unresolved issue? And an example could be you don't have the equipment. Okay, that is enable you to answer this fully. Okay. For example, a very common one is like we don't have the equipment to extract certain compound in a natural ingredients, okay, which is helping the antimicrobial effect or things like that. Then this could be something that is out of your scope that you cannot answer it directly fully your research question. So what can be further investigated? So this will live up to the extended research. Okay, so yeah, and then so you should have a equality, balance, and quantity. Oh, yes. So this is numerical and observe result. Okay, so of the secondary source and data use. Okay, so the secondary source, that means the external study that you've seen. Okay, aware of any limitation, uncertainty in the approach. So for example, that means they want you to criticize or evaluate the experiment, the method, the result of the external study that you have done. Okay. And yeah, so this, especially this part, they say that they should critically comment on the validity and reliability of the data relative to the management of variables within the investigation. So again, you need to look into the method and see if that's valid. Have they done enough negative and positive control, reliability related to the sample size, and also the length of the error bar and things like that. Okay, and then also very quick one is to show you the examiner report. So about Criterion C, we actually summarized them already, but just a very quick look. So first of all, the analysis part. So basically the lab report part, how you report your data. After that, you use those data to have a conclusion, okay, as evidence for your conclusion. Again, refer to the research question, okay, justify the choice of statistics approach, very important. So for example, if you conduct t-test, why you conduct t-test, okay. Graph is okay. Anything else? Okay, so a hardware research, okay, so you need to have expect to have a very lengthy discussion and evaluations. We'll come to that later on. And straight to conclusion. Now this conclusion, we have two types. One is the conclusion of your data, okay, of your experiment data, and then later on there's another conclusion of the whole extended essay after the evaluation. So so this one is this is what the examiner was pointing out, that a lot of people, they look into the conclusion very quickly, but that is not the conclusion of the whole essay. It's just a conclusion of the data, and they will recommend candidate to not use the word conclusion. Instead, they should be using the word analysis, okay, data analysis. Okay, and then so that's what is a better approach they want, is that to have a section that called discussion, and then where under the discussion you have a part for analyzing the data, and then you will elaborate it, okay, elaborate on the data to refer back to your research question, okay, where the preliminary idea conclusion are present. Okay, so that's the idea. And then a strong essay should have a evaluation first before conclusion. Again, now this conclusion referring to the conclusion of the whole EE. And so you should have an evaluation. Evaluation in this case will be evaluating how reliable, how useful your references to your study, okay? Yeah, so after you finish evaluating how useful your reference is, then you can have a conclusion, because the conclusion based on all these ideas, okay, you have a summary conclusion of the whole thing, okay? Draw at the end in the judgment. Okay, so the reason why they want to have evaluation before conclusion is to strengthen the argument, because the conclusion of the whole essay is drawn at the end of the after in the light of evaluation after you've done the evaluation. Okay, so make sure you got the format correct. This also mentioned in my first video in regarding to the biology EE. Okay, so yes, and then evaluation okay, so and then also evaluation in weak candidate, they're just evaluating the lab experiment. But here, evaluation, they should evaluate the reference or the external study that they have, okay, and assess how good they are in their essay, okay. So yeah, so here one of the feedback was evaluation rarely deal with source or given justification as to how the source are selected. So how do you select your references and how their suitability and reliability was judged. So again, you evaluate those external references. Okay, and okay, so I think it's nearly the end. Okay, oh no, actually a few more. Okay, so the next part is the mind map. Okay, so the flow. Okay, so the critical thinking part, you need to have the flow very clear. Okay, by this stage you should have collect enough research to help you to generate your idea. So this is just an example. Okay, so it's just like flow of ideas, how one ideas lead to another. Okay, so for example, one research and there's another research and the second research is supporting the first research. Okay, or it could be some research that's against certain research. Okay, and so on. But after all this, okay, you make sure you mention this the overall summary based on in the light of all this research. Okay, and you have evaluate how they're useful to your research question, how well they apply to a research question. Then you have a summary conclusion as to which side you believe. Okay, so that's the idea. So again, it would be good to have a mind map, and also it would be good to have your flow. Okay, so have draft up a flow of your ideas. Okay, so and then this part, okay, it's just a very quick summary in Word as to what the Criterion C critical thinking is about. So critical thinking, this part has 3 parts: research, analysis, and discussion and evaluation. And as here says that, okay, not treated equally. So the discussion and evaluation is very important. Okay, it's most weighted out of the 3 strands. Okay, so yes, in designing the final level. So make sure you have the arguments right. Okay, next one is the next part will be analysis. Okay, will carry more weight than the research strand. Now the reason why is because analysis is what your experiment is about. Okay, what your experiment is about. And research strand is already partly covered in criteria B. So that's why the analysis strand will carry more weight than the research strand in this case. And here the research strand is related, okay, not exactly the same as B, but it's covered by mostly covered by part B. Is here in this context, we'll not see only how you select your research, okay, but also to collect data through experimentation and use both of these to support argument. So not only you have your lab experiment result, okay, the data, and also you need to look at the data of your external reference and see if both support your arguments. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so that means in this case, okay, in the previous part, okay, maybe in criteria B, we're talking about how we look into the research. Okay, so what we're thinking about when we were doing the research. And then this part is how you use these research, okay, how you use it. And then the next one, okay. So here the discussion and evaluation, so what they're really looking at, okay, so this is big impact, is that first of all, as we mentioned in many videos, saying that the final conclusion of the essay should come after the evaluation. And just now we've shown that the reason why, because it's judged in the light of evaluations, okay. And then one of the problems that candidate face is that the evaluation doesn't really talk about or explain how the source are selected. Okay, so for example, you are selected, you prefer this source reference is because so for example, you have 2 references, and then in the end you need to decide which one is better. Okay, you could say that, oh, source A is better because it's much more recent compared to source B and so on. Okay, and or maybe you prefer source B more because it's more related to your experiment. Okay, so you look at the suitability and also reliability. So related to what we just mentioned is the method, okay, is and the experiment setup, okay, things like that. And the analysis, so for example, just a reminder why you need to choose certain statistic approach. And broad E, yeah, so most of this part, the analysis or the evaluation part, a lot of students, they were just talking about the experiment problem, but Not only that, you should also address broader issues such as the overall research approach, okay, or the nature of selection process for the source assets. Okay, so yeah, we've covered those just now. And that's about it for criteria C. So sorry that it's a bit lengthy because there's actually a lot of important aspect needs to be covered. So I hope this video helps you and guide you through in criteria C of the biology EE. So add oil and good luck. Thank you and bye bye.